Welcome to the Aleutian Islands. They belong to Alaska, which in turn belongs to the United States of America. The Aleutian Islands are kind of what you'd expect of an island chain straddling two tectonic plates. There are volcanoes there, earthquakes happen often, and there's even a defunct American nuclear testing site. The Aleutian Islands are also home to the westernmost point of the United States. These islands are also home to the only World War II battles in North America. These islands were also invaded by Imperial Japan. Yes, you heard that right. Imperial Japan invaded the United States of America. How did that go? May 1942. The head of the Japanese Navy, Isoroku Yamamoto, has his eyes on Alaska, more specifically the Aleutian Islands. This is because if the United States Army Air Forces, the predecessor to the United States Air Force, since the Air Force was only founded in 1947, 2 years after World War II ended, kept an airbase on the Aleutian Islands, the bombers stationed on that base could reach mainland Japan. At the time, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had already taken much of America's islands in the Pacific. Back to the head of the Japanese Navy, Yamamoto. He provided the 5th Fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy with extra ships and submarines, with the goal of capturing the Aleutian Islands. But wait, the United States codebreakers, Magic, had broken the Japanese communication ciphers. The US could now read Japan's top-secret war plans. It was a bit too late, however. Chester Nimitz, the head of the American Navy in the North Pacific, only learned of these plans by May 21st, 1942. The Japanese bombings of American soil would begin in less than 2 weeks. As soon as Nimitz learned about the possible invasion, he sent the 11th Air Force to locate and bomb the Japanese ships that were on their way to Alaska, preferably to bomb and destroy the 2 aircraft carriers. The plan was, once the 11th Task Force had obliterated the aircraft carriers, and with it the naval aircraft, the American Naval Task Force 8 would destroy the rest of the Japanese invasion forces. Again though, they were a bit too late. The naval patrol planes only saw the Japanese fleet on June 2nd, 800 miles or 1,300 kilometers southwest of Dutch Harbor, the main naval base of the United States in the Aleutian Islands. American forces were placed on full alert. Later that day, however, bad weather came and the planes couldn't spot the approaching forces. The very next day, taking advantage of the bad weather, Japanese planes bombed Dutch Harbor. Imperial Japan has just bombed the United States of America. It didn't go so well for the Japanese though. Since American forces were on full alert, they were ready for the planes. The Japanese planes were met with anti-aircraft fire, and the 11th Air Force came to try and attack the Japanese aircraft. The Japanese planes, however, immediately left to their aircraft carriers, doing minimal damage to the naval base at Dutch Harbor. The next day, on June 4th, the Japanese planes came back to Dutch Harbor, this time with greater success. They hit the oil storage tanks and partly destroyed the hospital. Bad weather cancelled American plans to go after the Japanese fleet. The bad weather also spoiled Japanese plans to invade Adak, home to the westernmost city in the United States. On June 5th, nothing happened. Then, on June 6th, 1942, Japan invaded and occupied Kiska Island. The next day, on June 7th, Japan invaded and occupied Attu Island. The American public were furious. How come a foreign power could invade American soil, and how could they occupy it? Additionally, this was the first time since the War of 1812, when the British Empire attacked a fledgling America, that American soil had been touched by hostile forces. American forces didn't try to liberate the islands until almost a year after they were invaded. It was in May 1943 that Operation Land Crab, the operation to liberate Attu Island, commenced. On May 11th, 1943, the 7th Infantry Division made an amphibious landing on Attu Island. 2 weeks later, after bitter fighting in the cold Arctic temperatures, the American forces, along with some Canadians as well, pushed the Japanese back to Chichagof Harbor. On May 29, 1943, the leader of the Japanese forces on Attu Island, Yasuo Yamasaki, led the remaining Japanese forces in a banzai attack, or basically a suicide attack. Almost all of the roughly 2,900 Japanese soldiers died, including Yamasaki. The Americans had liberated Attu Island. 2.5 months later, Operation Cottage, the operation to liberate Kiska Island, commenced. On August 15, 1943, American and Canadian forces landed on Kiska Island. However, 2 weeks before, Japanese forces had secretly evacuated, and the Allied forces liberated the island without any resistance, though they accidentally killed almost 100 of their own troops. The Americans had liberated Kiska Island. These 2 islands, apart from the War of 1812, were the only times that hostile forces occupied American soil. So, that's the story of the only World War II battles fought on American soil. If you liked the video, then be sure to subscribe and like. If you didn't like the video, then press the dislike button twice, and then, for good measure, press the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching Explained. New videos every other Friday.